What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice, FanDuel and DraftKings. This time for the conference championship games, two-gamer showdown advice for this weekend's playoff games. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined once again by Jack, the creator of the OccupyFantasy.com lineup builder, owner of DFS Magic. Jack, what's up, man? How you doing?
Hey Brian, good. A little bittersweet. I think this is the last of the short slate videos for the year, but it's a fun one. I think we got a lot of good content to get into. So how are you doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good. And yes, the last short slate video, but I'm going to try to team up with you for at least one more video. We're going to have multiple videos planned for the Super Bowl, various angles to attack different contests, different sites. So make sure you subscribe to the channel for that. But in this video, however, what we're going to do, we're going to break down both conference championship games from a showdown perspective and then from a two-game perspective. And don't worry, we will give out our favorite plays right at the beginning. That way, if you don't want to watch 45 minutes of video, you'll have your information that you need right off the bat. Our daily plug will be up Saturday afternoon on OccupyFantasy.com. That will be your written roadmap to the slate, showdown rankings, classic rankings, lineup construction tips for different contest types for all sites, for all slates. So make sure you go read that Saturday afternoon. Now, we are recording this Friday afternoon. The 49ers just started their practice, so we don't have the official injury report for that, but we have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. So we'll dive into the injuries for each team, how it impacts it, and just talk about overall strategy for the slate. If you have questions, because we're recording this on Friday, tons of time to answer them for you. We will monitor the YouTube channel, so drop a comment below the video if you have any questions, concerns, comments about the slate. Jack, what are your overall thoughts on these four teams playing in the conference championships from a DFS perspective?
Yeah, well, if you've watched our videos, personally, not the biggest fan of short slates that feature McCaffrey. He's so good. He's super expensive. So that's always a challenge. I think we'll have to spend some time talking about how you deal with that, both on the two gamer and the showdown. That said, though, I think there are some pretty cool matchup edges we've talked about, and like we've said a few times with these playoff slates, there are actually good players on all these teams, and we'll get into some high upside guys that are not super shocking. So overall, I'm optimistic, and I think I like that we're going to spend some time on showdown because I think there's some pretty good stuff there too.
Yeah, honestly, I think most of my allocation this weekend is going to be in the showdown formats. And I've been doing that most of the playoffs anyways with great success. So might as well keep that train rolling. And again, no one says you have to play the two gamer. If you're not comfortable with the two gamer or you are comfortable, you can allocate your bankroll however you like this weekend. So, Jack, let's talk about our favorite plays at each position. These are for tournaments only. The best plays, just sort by ownership in our model or the lineup builder. Who's your favorite tournament quarterback this week?
I'm gonna go Goff. Low ownership, elite stacking guys. Yeah, and I think it's under owned for the upside. I know San Francisco's defense gets a lot of praise, but they can be. Jordan Love just threw on them, and yeah. So I think I like that one. Why don't we alternate? So I'll give you the preferred running back this weekend.
For sure. And by the way, I like Goff too. He hasn't had to throw a ton when they've been leading. We expect them to be trailing. If the Vegas odds proved correct, then we should see more volume from Goff, and he should have the lowest ownership of the four quarterbacks. For me, I think the answer is probably any running back except CMC, but I think you have to like Gus Edwards and David Montgomery, guys with multi-touchdown upside, both sub 20% on the two-game slate. So Edwards 5,500 DraftKings, Montgomery $5,600. I like both of those guys for their touchdown equity. And again, on a slate where we will be looking for differentiation, these guys are actually pretty decent running backs.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of slates where Montgomery and Gibbs are expensive and the same price. We're finally seeing Montgomery's price drop, but we're not seeing the ownership go up with it, right? So love that take. I guess wide receiver is mine. Why don't you, if you're ready with the wide receiver, take it or tight end. I gotta think for a second.
Okay, for tight end, for me, I'll do tight end and keep you in line with the wide receivers. For me, it's the Baltimore tight ends, and we'll get to this in a second when we talk about the injuries. But Mark Andrews activated, expected to play. Isaiah likely also expected to be in the mix because these guys will likely cannibalize each other's snaps, at least in the eyes of the field. We expect both of them to be low owned. Why try to figure out which one to play when you can just play Kelsey, Laporta, or Kittle? That's how the field will handle the tight end position. So I think on a team with a great offense, great quarterback that likes to throw to the tight ends, Andrews or Likely, again, it may be difficult to discern which of these tight ends we like the most, but one of these guys at low ownership has a chance to break the slate.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and that's a great exploitable edge in Showdown as well, right?
Yes.
With those tight ends. Wide receiver, I'm just going to double down on my quarterback. Probably not a surprise, but St. Brown. On a two-gamer, if Detroit was favored, if McCaffrey wasn't on the slate with Lamar Jackson, he would be 70% owned, and we've seen that before. He is, we have him about 35%. It wouldn't shock me in small field where people like the points per dollar stuff if he's even lower. And he's a guy that could outscore McCaffrey outright, let alone be optimal with the $1,000 to $2,000 discount depending on the site. So double down on my stack there. I think if that hits, you can pretty much do whatever you want with the rather lesser lineup, and you'll be at least cashing and maybe live for some big stuff.
Absolutely love that. I'll also throw in Debo, and we'll talk about his injury here in a second. Odell Beckham and Valdez Scantling. Yes, we still can't escape the bad Kansas City wide receivers. Why not take the lowest owned version of them? So let's talk about injuries now, because there are some pretty impactful ones, despite most of these teams being healthy throughout the season. Let's start with the early game, Kansas City and Baltimore. We will start with Kansas City. Kadarius Toney, again, perpetually questionable. I think he might play this week. We'll see. Hasn't played for a while now, but always questionable, limited practices. We'll see if Toney gets in there. Would be a nice low-owned option to mix in. Derek Nottie, their defensive tackle, run-stopping guy, he is out once again. So another reason we like the Baltimore running backs. However, Jack, we don't talk about this too often, but the most impactful injury, maybe of the weekend, is Joe Thuney, left guard for the Kansas City Chiefs. Pro Football Focus is #1 pass blocking guard this year, #26 run blocking. Now, again, whatever you think about Pro Football Focus, whether you think their grades are bad, good, most people, film watchers, stats agree that Joe Thuney is one of the top guards in the league. So, a pretty big loss for them, Jack.
Yeah, and we'll recall the Super Bowl a couple of years ago when Mahomes had a banged up offensive line against a pretty elite front four, Tampa Bay, and he was just running for his life, and he even had Tyreek Hill in that game. He does not here. It's a tough spot without him. Obviously, I don't know that we have a big sample size of games without him, but it appears that maybe the field is not, as we see this all the time, right? The field is not taking those types of injuries into account as much as they should.
Absolutely. And just to be honest, I know the spread is 4 now. I don't think, and I think if you look at power rankings and if you just played this game 6 weeks ago, I don't think the spread would be this low. I think these teams are on two different levels. And yet we see sky high ownership for Rashi Rice, not necessarily for Mahomes, Kelsey, Pacheco. So real chance Kansas City lays an egg here, and I think the Tampa Bay Super Bowl is a great comparison. Do you feel the same way about Baltimore and them being on a different level than Kansas City?
Yeah, and I mean, all I had to do is I just went to the NFELO like EPA, and I mean, Baltimore is like 2 tiers above Kansas City. I mean, they are just an elite team. They're healthy, like they're peaking. I mean, yeah, I think yes, I think you said it right. I think the spread should be more, and I think it's not priced in for ownership, and we can talk about ways to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. So on Baltimore side, speaking of being healthy, Mark Andrews is back, as we said. They're also likely to get back cornerback Marlon Humphrey, their #1 corner. So it should be fully healthy going into this game. The biggest question, obviously, Jack, is Mark Andrews. How do you see the playing time split? My guess is, and again, we have no basis for this. Everyone is speculating. Remember, he was opened his practice window last week, got in a couple full practices, thought there maybe was a chance he was going to play, was ruled out in the divisional round game. Now is going to play. I would think coming off that nasty injury, no games under his belt since the injury, probably just used in high leverage situations, third downs, red zone. Maybe they use more two tight end sets. I have a hard time feeling that they don't use Isaiah Likely still in the passing game, but I'm curious to get your take.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, like we don't know, right? I think that's the most important take. The ownership will tell you the field thinks they know. They think it's Andrews is going to play 100% of the snaps. And what's funny is the projection is not great on him, but he's cheap. And I think you've made this point in past seasons. Like the more we get into playoffs, the more casual players we have that are playing these contests.
Yep.
They're going to see the name and just click it in, right?
Yep.
They're going to start a lineup with Lamar Jackson. They're going, oh yeah, I'm going to stack with Mark Andrews. So that's why we think he's pretty chalky. And yeah, I think you just leverage the fact that we don't know and the field is guessing. And to your point about the running backs, right? Like if anything else, this just further dilutes the target tree for Baltimore, and they're a run-heavy team. They're projected to be winning in this game, so I think it's just more of an argument to take advantage of the lower running back ownership because people are playing Andrews instead.
Exactly. So let me ask you this question now. So I assume you'll have exposure to both of these guys in your 150 lineups. And we see two tight end lineups win more frequently on shorter slates just because of the lack of options. Can you play Andrews and Likely together? Is that a reasonable idea?
I think so. I certainly, Baltimore features tight ends, and look, if you just look at them from a standpoint of pass catchers, yeah, I don't see any reason not to. Do you?
I don't. I don't. I think Likely is just cheap enough that you can make it work. And again, if you're looking at playing a flex guy in the $4,300 range, I'm looking at DraftKings right now. 4,300. We're talking about Beckham, Aguilar, so his teammates, Josh Reynolds, Likely could score a touchdown and outscore all of those guys. So I think it's definitely possible. So
He runs down the field routes too, right? He's not
yeah.
just like a fall forward for a 5 yard gain kind of guy.
No,
So
he's like one of the most athletic
that
tight ends in the league. So yeah, certainly has a chance on one or two catches to even get there. So, all right, moving on to the second game, Detroit and San Francisco. For Detroit, Khalif Raymond is still out, so we will get Josh Reynolds and Jamison Williams once again as number 2 and number 3 receivers for Detroit. Their guard Jonah Jackson is out. Frank Ragnaller's center is going to play despite being listed with the rare 4 injury designation: back, ankle, toe, knee, I think, which is crazy, but goes to show how tough some of these NFL players are. Their number 2 tight end, Brock Wright, is on injured reserve. They signed Zach Ertz to the practice squad. We'll see if he's elevated for the game, but they also have Anthony Firkser there behind Sam Laporta. Jack, you and I were looking. Jonah Jackson, the initial thought was losing the guard is not great, but I was pretty shocked to see that he hasn't rated that highly in most metrics all season long, so maybe it's not as big of a loss as we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and I think, the strength of the 49ers defensive line is the edge guys, right? And Detroit has two elite pass blocking. We'll stick with the PFF, right? They're really really good. Those guys are healthy, so we think probably not nearly as big of an impact as Thuney is against Baltimore because he's the best blocker, and Baltimore has really good interior guys.
Yeah, exactly. And now San Francisco, the big question mark obviously is Debo. We've touched on it a couple times so far. Likely game time decision. I think we're leaning in with the practice. No fracture shown on the X-rays from national reports. After the game, Kyle Shanahan said the injury was similar to the one he sustained in Cleveland. That was the hairline fracture, so it raised eyebrows a bit. That was clarified. He is practicing. Probably a pain tolerance issue. What do you see here, Jack? Because industry projections have him super low. Our ownership projections have him sub 10%. We don't really know how he's going to be used, right? This is the same as Mark Andrews. We do not know how Debo is going to be used, how many snaps he's going to get. But what are your initial thoughts? Because I don't think we'll get much information outside of he's questionable, he's game time. Then we get a report that he plays, got to play through the pain, and then we won't know.
Yeah, I guess I think it depends on the type of contest you're playing. Like if you're going to play a big GPP, I definitely think you want to get over the field here, and it doesn't take a lot, like you said. Like maybe double the field, 20% of your lineups, because he's a super upside guy that can break the slate. And it's the late game, right? So people aren't going to build with him. The optimizers aren't going to pick him up because the projections are bad. And we know people don't like the late swap. However, and I throw it back to you, and my entering assumption would be like for small field, you probably don't have to go out of your way to go there because if he goes off at 2% ownership in a small field contest, unless you need to get first, it's not going to kill you, and you can still, make some money. What do you think of that?
I think that's probably fair, right? But it also provides a great option. Let's say you're behind going into that second game and you had Ayuk, you can swap to Samuel, assuming you have the salary, and now you go from a 40% guy to a 5% guy or whatever. So he really does open up some options in small field. I wouldn't go into the contest thinking to play him, but I would definitely have that in my back pocket ready to use if I'm trailing after the 3 o'clock game.
Yeah, no, love that take. And again, this is an extra important one to be around for late swaps, whether it's to him from a chalky guy like Ayuk, or say you have like the nuts run out lineup and you have the 400 extra dollars, just play Ayuk, right? Because like
Yeah.
you're less likely to lose to 4% on guys. So yep, that makes
Exactly.
sense.
So if we look at last week, right, when Debo left very early in that game, and by the way, he was on the way to a monster performance. I feel like 4 points on 2 touches. Obviously, was going to be involved in the game plan early. That's neither here nor there. I only say that because I played Debo heavily last week. But of the routes run last week, Ayuk 43, Juwan Jennings 31, So picked up a big part of the slack there. Debo ran 6 routes. Chris Conley, Ray McLeod, 16 routes each. So while Jennings was the number 2 guy, Conley and McLeod split this wide receiver 3A, 3B role. And if Debo's limited, we expect those guys to play some. Now, this may not be important for the 2-gamer. Maybe it will. Both those guys will be less than 5% owned. But Showdown, especially Jack, even if Debo's in, those guys will be even lower owned. So just guys that you have to keep in mind because this injury is so impactful.
Yeah, when you talked about those guys, my head immediately went to this is a huge Showdown angle because everyone's just going to play Jennings, right?
Yes.
In 2-gamer and in Showdown. And if you're trying to play McCaffrey, at captain MVP, right? Like those seem like perfect guys to try to get different at low ownership and diversify your lineup.
Exactly. And Chris Conley, who I will forever be indebted to, certainly I will be considering him in Showdown as well. So, all right, that does it for the injuries. Let's move on now, and we'll go showdown by showdown and then finish off with some classic slate 2-game angles. Just a quick reminder, the Daily Plug will be up Saturday. Again, the written roadmap. If you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Get notified when any future videos go live. We'll have tons of content for the Super Bowl, so make sure you're subscribed for that. And give us a thumbs up. We appreciate that. So, KC and Baltimore showdown, Jack. Just a quick initial overall thoughts.
Yeah, I think, well, I always remember the Mahomes-Jackson matchup because it's the one that I was like 0.8 points from a solo million on
Yes.
FanDuel. But I think I kind of go back to the same idea there, which is both quarterbacks are super chalky, and then people just tend to kind of build balanced lineups using the value plays. And what I almost won with, and I think what would be super live on this type of one is a overstacking either team. I happen to like Baltimore more just from a mashup standpoint, but I think either way, there's leverage with 5-1 on DraftKings, 4-1 on FanDuel. Particularly actually on the Baltimore side because just the way the pricing works, Lamar, and then like most of the mid-tier guys that are better are Kansas City. Like people are going to try to play Rice, Pacheco, Kelsey, maybe even Butker. So yeah, I think overstacking is like my immediate thought here. Where are you going with this one?
No, I love that idea. And because we have the clear target guys on Kansas City, Pacheco, Rice, Kelsey, and not those guys on Baltimore. Yes, Flowers, but then we have the dilution of the tight end position with Andrews and Likely, not knowing who's going to be the wide receiver 2 through 4. Gus and Justice Hill splitting reps. So it's not the greatest fantasy environment. And we end up, even though they're favored in some games, we end up with balanced lineups or most of the field favoring heavy constructions in favor of the underdog just because of the lack of production from most of the other Baltimore guys. So if we look at the secondary guys, we look at the routes run last week. Zay Flowers ran 25 routes for Baltimore. Rashad Bateman, number 2 receiver, 21 routes. Nelson Aguilar, 18. Odell Beckham, just 8 routes. I'm not sure what that was about. I think there was a lot of discussion thinking that Odell would be saved for the playoffs, but he's going to be super low owned as a result. Jack, any take on these Baltimore receivers? Because we'll see Bateman relatively popular in Showdown. Aguilar, he's priced up a little bit after scoring the touchdown, and Odell after running 8 rounds, no one's going to play him.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually almost just easier for MME. You just like need to play all of them and get some leverage on the low ones. I think it's tougher in small field. So I guess, how are you approaching that with your kind of typical small field? That just seems like a tougher nut to crack.
Dude, it's super tough. I think you just go with the routes from last week as your baseline, right? And you play Bateman as your value piece in a Lamar stack. You play Likely. You know he's going to play some. We don't know how much Andrews is going to play. Flowers, obviously. Pair him up with the running back, ideally Justice Hill since he's catching passes. So I think there are clearer ways to play it, but it's not necessarily a guarantee, and there's a lot of leverage to be gained. And I think you can say the same thing about Kansas City side as well. So obviously Rashee Rice is number 1 receiver, 22 routes last week. MVS, 17 routes last week. Justin Watson, 14. McCole Hardman down to 10 routes, and Richie James, 5 routes. DraftKings priced Hardman even lower this week at $800. We expect him to be popular. Burned a lot of people last week, though, Jack. And again, no matter which paths we take to get to the playoffs, somehow we are now, for the 40th time seemingly this season, stuck again with pondering playing cheap, terrible Kansas City wide receivers.
Back to the MVS, he just won't go away. I recall a certain game in the regular season where I had like him and I needed a bomb and he had a bomb go through his hands toward the end of the game. But neither here nor there. This will feel gross to people, but so the lineup I referenced where I almost won was it was actually 4 Chiefs, and the Baltimore player was Devin Duvernay.
Yeah.
So if you kind of look here, right, you mentioned Rashee Rice, Travis Kelsey, Pacheco, funnel production, but very expensive. In fact, on DraftKings, they're more than double the kicker, and they're basically 4x the price of every other guy. So you could see in a blowout game script all of those guys middle, and none of them do enough to be optimal. And you could literally see like a 5-by-1 Baltimore with
Yes.
like MVS or Hardman or Edwards-Helaire. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
those lineups look super gross, and I don't think you have to go there in small field, but like I think for large field stuff, that stuff is super in play. And we'll look at FanDuel, but I assume it's the same where you've got those very expensive KC guys and then a bunch of super cheap ones.
Exactly. It is the same exact way. If we stick to DraftKings really quickly, we have Lamar as the most popular captain by far, obviously. And then to your point, the 3 Kansas City guys are next. And I think there are enough low-owned guys that you lock Lamar in your captain small field, maybe play him heavily in your 150. I could see rotating the Kansas City guys, but again, I'm just playing the angle here that Baltimore's defense is too much for them. They don't perform up to expectations, up to their salary-based expectations. So I think Lamar and maybe even playing mid-range guys like Justice Hill, Zay Flowers, Andrews likely at captain to get different, fit in one more of those Kansas City guys. I think that's the way to do it. And then if we look at the flex leverage, it's the same guys we've been talking about, the Baltimore tight ends and the non-Hardman Kansas City receivers. So the leverage is very clear. Whether it works or not is a different story.
Yeah, we touch on the multi RB same team every slate. I guess for Showdown and 2 game, are you okay with playing Edwards and Hill together with or without Lamar Jackson?
Hmm. I don't think you can do it on the classic slate with Lamar Jackson. I think maybe together it's possible, but you look at McCaffrey, Pacheco, Gibbs, Montgomery. I mean, if Detroit gets blown out, let's just say there's 2 blowouts, right? Kansas City blows out. I mean, Baltimore blows out Kansas City. San Francisco blows out Detroit. We could see McCaffrey and 2 running backs from Baltimore be optimal, I guess. I think it's very thin though. I would allow it in 150, but I wouldn't actively try to seek it out.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm always curious, like playing Gus and Lamar together in Classic always feels bad because like one of them is getting rushing touchdowns. But I feel like on a 2 gamer with his price, especially, like it's probably fine. But I'm guessing for Showdown, you're very much okay with all those guys together.
So, especially with the pricing. Hill is priced appropriately. Gus Edwards still over that 6K mark, so he's going to be under 20%. So anytime we can get differentiation with Lamar, we have to consider it.
Yeah, and I think, as a final note, it just to your point about Lamar captain, like there's just so much variety with these mid-tier guys, with Gus Edwards, with the leverage of overstacking Baltimore, that like we don't think you have to get crazy with captain here. Like it just seems like there's plenty of ways to get different with Lamar and not be duped.
Same on FanDuel as well, right? We have him at 50% or so projected MVP. Mahomes at 30%. Again, it's rare to get Lamar 50% or less, and this could be a slate. And there are so many guys that could just score a random touchdown, score a couple of points. It seems like just one of the better Lamar slates to lock him in at MVP, unless you feel otherwise. You're the FanDuel single game expert, though.
I'm almost positive I'm doing that, and yeah, so it's the same. So we know, again, back to the point of kind of more casual players, like people are gonna want to click in both quarterbacks and then like make it work. So
Yep.
you're gonna see a lot of those lineups. I think you have a lot strong data on FanDuel, right? That one quarterback
Yes.
is a lot more optimal. So that's a big edge. And on top of that, you have the same deal: Kelsey, Pacheco, Rice. Very expensive. You play one of them in a 4-by-1, or even you dip down in a blowout game script and look at one of the cheap guys, right? So, yeah, yeah. I think in both cases that's a good way to go.
Absolutely. All right. Any other thoughts on this game before we go to the Detroit and San Francisco showdown?
Um, Defenses showdown probably too low owned in this game environment with the
Yes.
quarterback. Yeah,
Way too low on
always play defenses when they're not owned.
with the Joe Tooney injury and with obviously Baltimore is a tough defense, a tough offense to play an opposing defense against. Again, all it takes is a kick return, fumble, interception, anything can happen. So low owned, I think you have to roster them in your player pool. So all right, Detroit and San Francisco, a little more straightforward seems like. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey is going to be 1 billion% owned. On DraftKings, Ayuk is especially underpriced, especially if Debo is limited in any capacity. We have him in the 8K range, or DraftKings has him in the 8K range. But I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me, Jack, is Detroit captains on DraftKings, and Detroit MVPs on FanDuel virtually unowned, despite the big ceilings for St. Brown, for Gibbs, Montgomery, even on FanDuel, Goff. Many ways that San Francisco players are the optimal captain or MVP.
Yeah, we don't normally do this. Maybe if I'm wrong, I can have the whole offseason to hide. But I love Detroit in this game. I start off by saying Goff. I just they match up really well. Y- I think like you said, any of these Detroit guys can optimal captain, and Detroit just matches up well defensively with as well as you can with McCaffrey. I mean, it's McCaffrey, but like they're not. They generally don't give that stuff up as much as other teams. What they do give up is the deep pass. And to your point, Ayuk is their only really good receiver. He's going to get a ton of looks, right? I mean, I don't know what do you project him for opportunities wise? Like he's got to be, you know,
I
far
mean,
and above.
yeah, it would be shocking. I mean, St. Brown's on the slate, so it's tough, but like Ayuk should conceivably be top two in opportunity on the slate, maybe top one at receiver. So I think he's a guy you have to play heavily here.
And the price is crazy, right? Like he should be the same price as St. Brown probably for the opportunity he'll get in this game, and he's
Yes.
not.
Yep.
Um, and Kittle too, right? I mean, Detroit gives up the deep pass, so if San Francisco scores, I think it's more likely than not that they're gonna complete the passes. So, I say all this, McCaffrey will get 40 touches for 200 yards, and I will be crying. But we'll keep trying it here. Maybe we'll get lucky. So I guess, are you thinking similar to the first game? Do you think there's enough differentiators here that you're just looking for McCaffrey captain and getting different, or are you prioritizing the Detroit guys we just talked about at captain?
No, I think ownership's a little more correct here, and it's a little more predictable. So the only leverage we really have are the defenses, which I do love in this game. Obviously, with Purdy, we know the interceptable pass rate. That discourse is all over the internet. We don't have to rehash it here. Goff can turn into a pumpkin at any moment. We've seen it this year and in years past. So the defenses are a fantastic place here. We have the uncertainty in the San Francisco wide receivers beyond Ayuk with Debo and Jennings and Conley and McLeod. So McCaffrey's going to get every single touch basically out of the backfield. Detroit, we know who their guys are. So there's not a lot of cheapos to play here. So to me, especially in small field, it's going to be scary not to click in McCaffrey, but to get that differentiation, in order to play 1 to 2 low-owned guys, playing that 1 or 2 low-owned guys in your flex it looks really gross. I'd rather just play one of the lower-owned captains and get a little bit higher floor lineup, even higher ceiling potentially. If you go down from McCaffrey at captain, it offers a lot of benefits in all contest types, not just large field or small field.
Yeah, and I think the contrast here with the first game, right, is the first game we have low-owned players like the Kansas City receivers and the Baltimore receivers. That they're gross, but they are pretty involved. Whereas like these two teams are just so funneled to their top guys that like it seemed a lot more reasonable for Amon-Ra St. Brown to outscore McCaffrey than like Isaiah Pacheco to outscore Lamar Jackson. It's just
Yes.
so I think to your point, like it's just a lot more reasonable to play those guys.
And to be clear,
Um,
just to be clear, the captain idea about fading McCaffrey small field, large field, that applies mostly to DraftKings only. I think Jack small field, it's really, really tough to get away from McCaffrey. Maybe Purdy in small field at MVP on FanDuel. Purdy actually provides pretty good leverage at a reasonable rate. But large field, I could see, and again, I could see you employing the strategy of let's fade McCaffrey completely. Yes, it's tough, and you need some some guts to do that. But just pray he's not the highest scoring guy, and you just rotate a bunch of other guys at MVP.
Yeah, I mean, I think I copied your strategy from a while ago on this. Is like I'll probably just enter a couple small fields with McCaffrey at MVP, and that will free me up to go take shots, large field, and not take a zero. What are your thoughts on the team? 5-1, 4-2, 3-3, 4-1, 3-2, etc. on this one?
It's a good question. So I think it's going to be San Francisco heavy, especially if Debo is limited or we get any word on that, because people play McCaffrey, Kittle, Ayuk, if they can fit them in. Jennings, one of the other guys, maybe Purdy, especially in classic contests. We'll see that. When it comes to Showdown, those guys are a little bit pricier, so it's tougher to do. And you do have the Detroit secondary receivers that'll pick up some ownership. But most of the ownership is on San Francisco side, so you have to expect that the field to build more 49ers heavy than balanced.
Yeah. I mean, Jennings is the obvious guy, and then Conley will probably get some. Laporte is sitting here again at half the Kittle ownership,
Yep.
and I mean, yeah, did it work last week? I don't remember.
No, but we're
Uh,
gonna go back to it though.
I mean, he caught a bunch of it was short passes though, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
He got close. Yeah, no, like that take. Let's see, any other like trashy guys we haven't talked about, like backup running backs or tight ends, or is this one pretty gross for all those guys?
should we talk about Zach Ertz for a second because we feel like casuals might click him in if he's activated.
Yeah.
But again, like they don't use their number two tight end very often at all. Ertz obviously is a veteran, but are they going to play him over Laporta? No. Again, he still has to be activated. But that is a guy just to keep in mind here, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the only other person is not in the zero own category, but like you mentioned Montgomery on the two gamer, I mean, he's
Yes.
sitting here at very low ownership and a reasonable price. I mean, on DraftKings he's 56. I think that's quite a bit down from. I mean, what's
It's the first
Gibbs
time.
is
It's the first
Gibbs is
time on
88.
Showdown that Montgomery's been under that backup quarterback mark on DraftKings Showdown. So
Yeah, and Gibbs is 88. I think in previous slates they've been nearly equal.
yeah,
And like we said, we're not seeing the ownership go there because of the price drop. So it seems like a great value play in pretty much any showdown lineup if you're looking for like a mid-range guy.
yeah, and even a decent floor, right? You look at Montgomery's game logs, and yeah, 7 points isn't going to win you tournaments more than likely, but you get 7 points from a $5,600 player. That's more than enough in most small field GPPs. I mean, he's a guy that automatically differentiates and has a high floor, high ceiling. So I think he's a great play for Showdown.
And I'll continue my X's and O's rarity here, but I mean for all the heralding San Francisco's defense kits, they are a bottom 10 EPA run defense. We saw Green Bay have success, and Detroit is a better rush offense. And like you mentioned, Goff can turn into a pumpkin. You got to know the coach knows that. Like, would it shock anyone if they just came out and tried to hand the ball off like 30 times? Like, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. So, all right. Anything else, Jack, before we finish this video off with the two-game classic strategies?
Let's do it.
All right. So, if you've been around, been watching these videos, you know the three tenets we preach: four short slates, 2, 3 game, 2, 3, 4 game DFS slates, leaving salary on the table, playing lower owned players, 20, 15% or less, and overstacking, playing a bunch of guys from one game. Those generally are positive expected value moves on shorter slates. Jack, all three look likely to me. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but leaving salary with the Debo uncertainty and some of the receivers with Amon-Ra, Rice, and Ayuk, one likely gets left out, leaves room for a cheaper third receiver. We could see salary left over in that regard. Low owned plays, there are plenty. We've talked about many in this video. And overstacking. It wouldn't shock me if either one of these games outscored the other game.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think we not to say people getting injured is good, but like the Debo injury just makes. We always talk about San Francisco being maybe the hardest team in the NFL to apply our strategy to, but because he's injured, one, if you do only want to play a three-man stack, if you just play Debo, you're automatically
Right.
unique. So you don't even have to play a fourth guy. Or if you do want to play a fourth guy, you've got Jennings, Conley, even the other receiver. Is it Bell or
McLeod.
Rivers or something? McLeod. So like, there are ways to play a four-man 49er stack without spending your entire cap. Detroit, we've if you watch these videos, we love them. We've talked in previous slates about Baltimore, with their passing tree right now and the cheaper running backs and the tight ends. Like that's a super good four-man. And then Kansas City, we know how to do it. You play two of Pacheco, Rice, Kelsey. You play a cheap pass catcher and hope they hit, right? So yeah, I think this is a great one for that. And then, like you said, we've got multiple lower owned pass catchers. I just want to point out for folks, like this is probably the best two-game pass catcher slate we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like all four teams have elite multi-touchdown pass catchers. Andrews, you point out, maybe he's not fully healthy, but generally they're all very good here. I guess this one to me, Brian, comes down to like, do you think McCaffrey plus some 5K receiver is going to score more points than, pick two or more of these elite pass catchers that could price that out?
Yeah, that's the question you have to answer because McCaffrey is going to be popular, obviously the most popular player on the slate. And yeah, it's something that's going to be tough. And I imagine he ends up even higher owned than what we project. It always happens with guys like McCaffrey, especially on playoff slates. So, yeah, man, I think as we get deeper and deeper into the postseason, teams are more and more likely to not let McCaffrey beat them. Dude, we'll stack the box if we have to. We'll pinch down, make Purdy beat us. And Purdy almost beat himself last week in Green Bay, beat himself against Baltimore. I think more and more teams are going to try to do that. So if I had to choose, it would be not playing McCaffrey and playing two other guys that are closer in price. I'm sure you probably feel similar, despite how unlikely it is that it's going to win.
Yeah, and I think this is another great example of contest selection, right? Like I'm not going to play zero McCaffrey on the entire slate, but I'm probably going to find some like I don't know 20-man, 40-man, 60-man contests. Just play something, play him, make one smart pivot, and that's enough to win, right?
Yep.
But like when I in the 100,000 person contest, if I play it, like I might go zero, and it's not because I don't think it'll win. It's just like we said, it's a very clear way to get leverage on with these pass catchers, and I don't have to hope for bad players to score 3 touchdowns here. They're actually good receivers, so
Exactly.
we'll see what happens.
All right, final question here. 4 quarterbacks on the slate. I assume you're using all 4 in your MME lineups. If you're playing 3 small field lineups, which one are you excluding?
Oh, man, Mahomes is
I know,
a killer.
dude. I know, same.
It's a killer.
Same. And I don't want to say that, but I agree with you.
Same brain. That's good. At least we're going down together on this one when he makes the Super Bowl. But yeah, I think it's just the ownership of him and his pass catchers does not reflect the toughness of the matchup relative to the opportunity of the other 3 guys. So
I agree. Totally agree. All right. Any final thoughts, Jack, before we get out of here and we build our lineups this weekend and then we turn our attention to the Super Bowl?
No, I think just be around for that Debo late swap. I guess we should clarify. Like we're recommending if you're doing multiple lineups, like probably build with Debo in and just make sure you're around to deal with it. That's the best way to do it. If you're not going to be around, like you can't do it, but then we might say you probably don't want to go super heavy because it's just a tremendous opportunity to leverage the field that's either not going to play him or not going to swap appropriately.
For sure. And I think it is a good idea, even in smaller contests, to build with some salary left over in mind, because it does offer a lot of flexibility. This video has been almost 45 minutes long, Jack. Were we talking about the Debo small field swap pre-recording, or did we talk about it in the video?
Oh, you talked about it
Okay.
in the video. Yeah.
So plenty of options to get different in small field. If you're behind, you can swap to Debo. So just make sure you have those options available. And again, we'll have hopefully 30 minutes or so in between games to make swaps. Definitely be around for it. So that'll do it for this video. Make sure you follow Jack on Twitter at DFS_magic_, mostly just to see his hockey screenshots, I imagine. You can follow me at Brian Jester FF, also at Occupy Fantasy. Join our Discord server where you can chat with other members of the OccupyFantasy.com community, ask us questions, ask questions about the lineup builder. Very rarely can you get direct information and direct answers from someone who built the product that you use, and Jack offers that in our Discord server. Link is in the description below. And OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get the write-ups, rankings, ownership, tools, everything to crush this weekend's slates. So for Jack, I'm Brian. Thank you for listening, as always, and good luck in the conference championships.